Okay, looks like I can record about 10 slides at a time without this whole system just crashing down on me. So hopefully, I've got this worked out. Picking up where we left off, the term class. We're just talking about class in general, not as a system, but social class. We're referring to large categories of similarly ranked people located in a hierarchy and distinguished from other large categories by occupation, education, income, and wealth. These are elements that separate people into different lifestyles. Social class provides people with different chances and different ways of seeing the world. But now, class is two dimensional. It's not just economic, class is also a lifestyle. Studies show us that upper class folks have different patterns of speech, different tastes in music, fashion, food, decor, leisure activities. So, class is not just a symbolic division, it's a real division of society that manifests itself in behavior. We look at systems of stratification. Closed societies. In a closed society, mobility is uncommon. Political and cultural norms and values dictate what your mobility is, and your status is assigned at birth, and it cannot be changed. It's usually inherited. Okay. In an open society, there are few impediments to mobility. People move up and down in the class hierarchy on basis of desire, merit, and talent, and people compete for positions in social hierarchy. Most average people in the United States will tell you the U.S. is an open society. You can decide for yourself whether you think that's true or how open it is. Slavery. Slavery is a persistent form of inequality throughout most of recorded human history. It has existed in all regions of the world. Slaves are often captured, service slaves for punishment of crimes or unpaid debts. Now we're looking at slavery in the United States, and I'm going to tell you up front that this slide annoys me, but I'm going to go ahead and present it because it's how a lot of people talk about it, but we'll talk more later about why this is not really correct. When we're looking at Africans who were in fact slaves in the United States between 1660s and 1865, we know that whole system was supported by an economic rationality. This idea that I can't harvest my crops without this, slave labor. They lacked all legal rights. There was no laws creating physical distance between races. There was just a social distance. Okay. And this is very different from indentured servitude, which is often entered into voluntarily to pay for debts of some kind. But we'll talk more about why we can't really say those people are slaves. But I want to take a look at slavery in some different places to point out how slavery in the United States is vastly different than it was in other places. And that's why our system is looked at so very often. Slavery in Brazil, for example, they exceeded us in terms of numbers of slaves and how long slavery lasted. They imported slaves beginning the 16th century and abolished it in 1888. Now, they also used an economic rationality, but the big difference is that in the United States, slavery was justified by the idea that Africans were non-human, that they were not like us. But in Portuguese society, their slavery was much more humane practices because their conception of Africans was that they were just unfortunate people who found themselves in this unfortunate situation that the Brazilians themselves may have found themselves in had the tables been turned. Brazilian slaves retained legal rights. They could own property. They could marry freely, buy their freedom, or even seek out another master. They could do none of those things under the U.S. system of slavery. At present, slavery exists in unique and new forms. We estimate there's roughly 27 million people in slavery today. We're talking about slavery. We're talking about control of persons for the purpose of economic exploitation. You may have heard of this as human trafficking. Human trafficking is an umbrella term, but we often separate it out into sex trafficking, meaning people who are forced into labor in the sex industry, and human trafficking, people who are forced into labor in sweatshops and domestic services. How do you become trafficked? Sometimes people are sold by their families to pay for debts. Sometimes they're kidnapped, and sometimes they're lured into what they think is going to be legitimate work. But when they arrive at their workplace destination, it's not. It's slavery. The caste system is the purest type of social stratification. Mobility is severely constrained. Your social position is inherited. You are a member of that caste for life. Your social interaction is limited to those in your caste. Marriage, not surprisingly, is restricted to people in your same caste. We call that endogamy or endogamous. United States had a caste system. Post-slavery, a system of white control emerged in southern states. You may have heard this referred to as Jim Crow, which is a caste-like form of stratification. This is when slave masters tried to reestablish dominance through denial of voting rights and sharecropping. There were laws segregating people in all areas of social life, which was not the case in slavery, if you remember. You can see that in things like racial etiquette, people of different races not shaking hands, not calling black men sir, but boy. And this was maintained through an ideology of white racial superiority. We're talking about class as a system of stratification. We're talking about groupings of people with similar incomes and occupations. Race is part of that basis in nearly every society. Gender. Let me say that again. Race and ethnicity are a basis of organization and inequality in almost every society. They're not necessarily a form of class. We do see a correlation here in the United States. Gender is a form of organization and inequality in every society. There's no society where men and women perform identical tasks or where they rank completely equally. Age, we serve different roles based on our age. A class system is structured, it is not random, and the social institutions in that society operate to assure positions of certain groups. So, like government, the economy, education. A class system differs from other systems in that it is open and fluid. Class positions are in some part achieved, and class is economically based. A class system is an open system based largely on material possessions and access to resources. Marrying within your class is common, but it's not mandated, so endogamy. Industrialization encourages the formation of a class system, but capitalism especially does. From World War II to the 1970s, class boundaries started to soften, but have been hardening ever since the 1970s. Now, Weber pointed out there's other components of class, specifically wealth, prestige, and power. Wealth refers to economic resources, my ability to purchase. Prestige refers to my status, my respect, regard, how people treat me with deference. Sometimes we display our prestige through status symbols. And power refers to my ability to carry out my own will despite resistance. Power underlies all inequality. And inequality in wealth, prestige, and power are very interrelated. We also use a term called the power elite to refer to those who make big decisions in U.S. society, because in our society, power lies in the hands of the few. When we talk about status, we're talking about our social ranking. Typically, a person has a similar rank in all three dimensions of social class: wealth, power, and prestige. And we call this status consistency. When I have a mixture of high and low ranks in those three dimensions, we call that status inconsistency. So, like maybe I have a high level of wealth, low level prestige. When someone has status inconsistency, they're likely to experience one frustrating situation after another because they're treated differently depending on where they are because of the status inconsistency. An example of this might be if someone's in the mafia. They may have a lot of power and wealth, but we don't hold that in a lot of prestige. Max Weber saw class as being closely related to people's life chances, and he defined life chances as opportunities to provide material goods, positive living conditions, and favorable life experience. In times of danger, affluent and powerful people have a better chance of surviving than people of ordinary means. Marx said class was super simple. Social class was your relationship to the means of production. The means of production means things we use to produce things. Okay, so like factories, tools, etc. So he said there's a two-class system. Do you own the means of production? Then you're a member of the bourgeoisie. Do you work at a place that is the means of production? You are the proletariat. And he pointed out that if people had class consciousness, things might change. For example, class consciousness, a shared identity with individuals with a similar class membership. given that we all tend to identify ourselves as middle class, we do not have a lot of class consciousness in this